am Pow Comic Hour with your hosts, Andrew Garner.
And Chris Ramos.
Tonight we cover The Eternals.
We're coming at you, Cosmic.
By Jack Kirby. That's right, folks. That's where it started. The one, the only, Jack the King Kirby.
So we did this actually because the movie is coming out, as everyone knows, in November here. And we are just sort of refreshing our knowledge on the Eternals before the movie hits and your knowledge on the Eternals before the movie hits.
Because I'm guessing most common people, except the real hardcore nerds, probably never heard of the Eternals.
Yeah.
Just like the Guardians of the Galaxy. Nobody heard of those guys before the movie hit.
Yeah, I Marvel right now, I think they're just taking jumps and they're like, you know what? We're going to introduce every wacko thing. Because the Eternals is kind of out there. I mean, it really is. And when it was first written, it wasn't as part of the continuity at all.
Yes. So they decided let's peel back the layers and let's do a Jack Kirby wanted to do like a take on his own like creation story.
Yeah, I mean, Kirby had so many ideas in his head. I think that even working with Stan Lee for over 10 years, I think Kirby still had things in the, that's what everyone loved about him. It was just this unending fountain of comics. And when you look at Kirby's life, I mean, he was born, I think 1917, started his first comic strip in 1936.
Yeah.
And then Fantastic Four came out in 1961. So, I mean, he was already, really into comics before the Fantastic Four #1 is kind of seen as like the first big one,
Yeah.
First,
would you say it's bigger than Spider-Man, Amazing 15?
Well, I'm saying it's the help start Marvel.
Oh yeah, I guess
so. Marvel,
sure.
And it helped really propel Kirby and Stan Lee as like
the duo.
Yeah. So that was November of 1961. Kirby went on to just obviously create just about everything that we can think of for the next 9-10 years.
And that's kind of the ironic part, I think. Just to start with that is he pretty much created the Marvel universe with Stan Lee, and he had his own take on the creation of the Marvel universe.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So it's like a double layers of just peeling it back.
And to just get this right off the bat, so Kirby, Fantastic Four #1 came out in 1961.
You have that memorized.
Yeah. Kirby ended up leaving Marvel in 1970 because he was just at odds with Stan Lee and at odds with Marvel. And he wanted to have something that he was creator owned, something that was him and stories he wanted to tell. So he left Marvel in 1970, which was a huge, huge, huge shakedown. And he went to DC. He wrote New Gods in December of 1970 is when that came out.
Yes.
He was at DC for a few years and he came back to Marvel. He's back.
Yep. You can never leave.
Did you read New Gods?
I've started bits and pieces of New Gods. That's my other adventure I want to go on someday. I just picked up the Absolute edition of the Absolute Fourth World.
So Kirby, he put together a whole pantheon of just space gods, and it was very similar.
A saga.
Yeah. He wanted to tell a complete story. He didn't get to tell the whole story at DC, and then he ended up returning to Marvel in 1975, and he said, "Hey, I've got an idea for Marvel of space gods and space things." And in 1976, The Eternals comes out, and that's what we're reading today.
Yes. And just kind of like on the front cover of Eternals #1, it says, when gods walk the earth, the Eternals, we found the tomb of the space gods and they're not dead. Look to the stars. The gods are coming back. And just to see this cover and you're just like, oh, I'm in for something big, huge, cosmic thriller adventure that's over the top.
Yeah. And Kirby's back. Yeah. Kirby's back. It was like a big deal.
Because all of his characters that he really made, with the exception of, maybe Fantastic Four, have been larger than life.
Yeah.
And nothing, and even the Hulk or anything like that, it's just, they're huge. I think he liked just to look to the stars and just seeing what he could pull out of his head and his imagination.
Yeah, the only thing that really historically happened was Jack Kirby was just on such a pedestal for so long that when he
Sure.
returned, people had huge
expectations.
expectations. Yeah.
And I mean, when he came back, he was writing himself and doing the art.
These are his stories.
Yes.
Yep. And that's what the Eternals is. So when the movie comes out, that is something that is truly a creator vision that is outside of Marvel, but now they're making it inside of Marvel. And eventually the Eternals started weaving into the Marvel universe a little more.
Yes.
But you'll notice when you're reading it, at first, that's what I said. I said, God, this is hard to place. Like, what time is this? And what other characters are affected by this? Because
sure,
Jack Kirby came in and said, I'm going to tell this story and it's going to just shake up the whole world, which they always say, this, the Marvel universe will not be the same after this story. But this was really something. And issue number 1, and we always kind of start the podcast with what we read. So I read the Eternals complete collection, which is issues 1 through 19, which is Jack Kirby's run. And that's what I read.
Yep. And that took place from July of 1976 to 1978. So that's pretty cool. I read this in the Eternals complete omnibus. And so there is a separate omnibus for the Jack Kirby run, but it's very hard to get. They just released this edition, the complete collection omnibus, about a year ago. So still easily available to get and see what this vision he brought to life was. And so besides the Jack Kirby run, it also contains the Peter Gillis 12 issues. The additional bonus footage from What If, dug a little bit more in the origins of the origins. And then just kind of what happened after the Peter Gillis run and just continuing the story that Jack Kirby left.
So you continued reading after that.
Yes, so I read all of that. The only thing I didn't read in this omnibus, just because I'm an Avengers completist almost, or I want to read Avengers in sequential order, is there's like 3 issues of Avengers. And I kind of regret not reading it because it does explain a few things.
Oh, you skipped those to read it?
I skipped those just because I was like, I don't want to know. And then I was like, oh, I should have read it.
Well, I do want to know. So the first issue starts off right away with Kirby being, I think, very Kirby-esque. I mean, his drawings, his art was automatically these great, huge machines and mechanics things that he always put together.
Yeah, like besides, Kirby, the artist, doing his pencils and everything, his people are so identifiable, but his technology and the way he drew it was just, it blows my mind. I just want to have like a poster on my wall of like something huge, like Kirby-esque.
It kind of reminds me of like any modern sci-fi or even just like Fifth Element or something like that, where you get an idea of like, oh, wow, that's big. And then something even bigger appears. So you think in outer space, you could, if you could build it, have a spaceship or starship immensely huge, just
absolutely.
Monstrously huge.
Yeah.
And Kirby was the first one that just sort of constantly put that into everyone's face.
Yeah.
It's just,
and nobody can duplicate it. Exactly. Never.
Yeah. Why not have something that is just insanely enormous in that? So you get introduced to some archaeologists right away.
Yes. Dr. Damien.
Dr. Damien. Old guy Dr. Damien and 2 humans.
Yes. Well, 1 human.
Yeah, you start reading and figuring out that, not everything here is as it seems. He introduces, I think, quite a few different characters right away. Like within 10 pages, you get like, this group of archaeologists. You get sort of another group of
Ike
monster
Harris,
men.
And I think his daughter's name's Laura.
Yeah, Icarus and Laura.
Yeah.
And it's funny because Icarus, it right away kind of has that.
Ike Harris.
That's
Ike Harris, Icarus.
I think it's Icarus.
Yeah, it is. No, well, like he introduces him as like, that's his like pseudonym is Ike Harris.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
It's kind of a play on it, which is smart.
And then people get
but cheesy.
bumped away.
Yeah. Oh, Margot. His daughter's name's
Margot.
Margot.
Yes, Margot.
Because everybody knows a Margot.
Yeah. And the funny thing with me and reading some of these things is I don't know if it's just a thing that I do when I read, but you can't help but to associate characters with other characters. So like if you're reading a new comic, you're sort of like, oh, that's sort of like the Hulk, and that's sort of like that guy,
Yeah.
and that's a very Superman character.
Mm-hmm.
I think Kirby did that on purpose to sometimes to just say, yes, I realize that this is similar to another character, but I'm going to up it another level. I'm going to give them some more powers or change the way that they talk, or he kind of like took the idea and then just tweaked it to himself, I guess.
Yes.
But yeah, as the issue goes by, you sort of learn that
Icarus knows more than
he's
that
he is not a human. And you as the reader become sort of like Margot. Like she asks the questions.
She's the reader,
the guide.
Audience.
Yeah. So she's like, well, I don't understand. What do you mean? And then of course he goes into, this huge explanation part for you, the reader.
Yes. And it's really cool. Just kind of, walking through all these, and they kind of played up as the Inca ruins.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, these are like undiscovered ruins from the Incas. And I'm like an expert in this language, this archaeology. And I just want to know more about it and explore this tomb that nobody's been in before. And that's kind of how it starts. And because you can relate to that, or at least you can have some sort of, you've seen it in school before. You can, have a ground base.
Yeah, you always think that, you hear the stories that the pyramids were built by aliens and that the ancient Incan civilization are somehow influenced by an even more powerful civilization than ours. And so Kirby just embraces that and just makes it part of the Marvel lore.
Yes.
And, I guess before they explain what is going on and sort of who developed the humanity as a species, Marvel Comics is different than other comics like DC and Image. Marvel Comics does not have like a heaven and hell, and it doesn't have like
there's not an explicit like heaven.
Yeah, so
there is explicit like hell, different hell dimensions.
And then they do talk about but it's like another dimension kind of thing, and they don't really talk about like mythology all that much, just to say that it is there because like Hercules and Thor and stuff are part of it, but at the same time they don't really
that's the closest thing I think you could comparatively ideally,
that there's a pantheon of gods.
Pantheon is it's Asgard and Olympus, but Asgard's the more known one.
And even those are just different realms.
Realms.
So the earth itself is not really linked to any religion, and it's not really linked to any direct pantheons that like
in the Marvel universe.
In the Marvel universe to direct Earth. So Kirby starts explaining it in this way, and that's kind of his story here, is to explain how humans came to Earth. Go, you tell it. You read the whole thing.
I did. And I guess we kind of, as we're walking through the issue, we're introduced to some bad guys that are in it. Lord Toad. That's cool. Yeah, he kind of looks like a toad. And his like disciple or whatever, his other bad guy, a crow, and a couple other bad guys and stuff. And you're like, oh, okay, they're kind of in the background, but they're like, there's like a disturbance that they can feel. It's like a chain reaction of events coming off. And and meanwhile, our heroes are exploring the tomb until Icarus reveals that he is larger than life, and he is part of a race called the Eternals.
The Eternals.
And he starts to tell the story of the creation of the Eternals, the humans, and the deviants.
So he says, way back that Earth was visited by
the space gods, or as space gods, we'll hear a new term called the Celestials.
And the Celestials are, they don't pop up in the comics as much as like Galactus or something like that, but they are a supremely powerful cosmic being.
Yep.
And they're just
the top of the food chain.
Yeah, they're just an entity that just sort of orchestrates the universe.
Yep.
So they're saying years and years ago, these space gods descended on Earth, and they decided to, populate the Earth.
Experiment on the apes.
Yeah, they said the apes are close to what we want to do, so we're just going to pick the apes.
Mm-hmm. And so, they start to experiment on the apes, and as they're experimenting through it, they run into error, they run into something more balanced, and they run into like a supreme being. And just to kind of explain, we'll start from the low end of it, or the villain of it, the deviants. Structurally unstable, each new generation of deviant appeared in new and monstrous ways. His lot was constant war. So very warmongering. And they were like the failures.
Yeah, and they're like they're the monsters that you would think of. So they became sort of like what folklore would consider, dragons and demons and things like that. They're just like weird and mutated and stuff.
Yep. And then the humans, the species bred with true balance of structure and disposition. Although he was a destroyer, the human was capable of building for peace. His kind was destined to inherit the earth. He belonged to it.
So they kind of put the humans as like the middle ground, the balance, like they're the set level. So the deviants are below them, but the humans had potential, right?
Yes.
Like that's what they said. Like you're a human, but like you have potential.
Yes. And then the Eternals. The Eternal, he is more a child of the gods than of Earth. He reached for the universe. The Eternals bred few in number and were immune to time and death. Like the gods, they lived apart from all other living beings.
So the Celestials sort of set this in motion, and since they are forever, they just said, we're going to start this off, and you guys can figure out how the Earth is going to balance itself out. We've put the deviants, the humans, and the Eternals on Earth. We've planted the seeds, and we'll see you later. And the Celestials left.
Yeah.
And they just left
pretty
Earth
much
to figure it out.
To have a future visit and to see how all three of these races are doing. Kind of to all the constant reevaluation.
So they said right away the deviants populated quickly. And they just advanced really fast.
Right.
Too.
And they built a city underground, while the Eternals went for the mountaintops.
Because they could fly.
They could fly, yeah.
You
forgot that what now.
They could fly, they're super powerful, they could do all sorts of cool stuff, yeah.
And then man just kind of conquered the earth.
Yeah.
The middle ground. So that's kind of where all three of these races start off as.
So then the story progresses that what's happening now, it is modern day. So you kind of get the idea that this is a catalyst to something big is happening.
Mm-hmm.
That Icarus is telling them constantly, like, there's bad tides ahead. Something's building. This is a time for the Earth to prove itself. Yes. And then by the end of the first issue, you realize that something is visiting the Earth.
Yep.
And then it says the Celestials are coming. So I think if you just read this first issue, like if you just plucked it off the stand and read it, I think that's fair enough. That's enough
it's a
of
cool
a
promise.
Hook. Yeah.
And you could obviously tell that the deviants were the bad guys. They were trying to attack the Celestials before their judgment. And the Eternals are stewards of the gods. They're trying to follow their orders. The humans are kind of caught in the middle, but also are kind of ignorant to everything that's going on. They're the insiders looking out.
Yeah, I thought that was funny. Like the humans are, at this point in the timeline, because it's modern day, and not like Inca day, Inca ruins days. The humans are sort of like, I want to say like they're focused on themselves.
Yes.
So they don't realize that there is ancient history that's written, and they don't
Yes.
realize that the Celestials are coming to check up
Yeah.
on the humans. So what you eventually learn is that the Celestials come back to Earth every once in a while, and they
Yeah.
just see how things are going.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time they came back, they found out that
the second host,
the
deviants.
deviants had taken over the Earth. So they
it was like Lumeria was like running wild. They were starting war, and they just leveled them.
So the Celestials are like, we're going to flood the Earth and get rid of you.
Yeah.
And so that was the Great Flood, which is funny because
it's a cool reference.
They
to bring
talk
back.
about that. Yeah, it's the Great Flood, and then that the humans built an ark, and that the Eternals helped them.
Mhm.
And then the Eternals helped the humans survive, and the deviants got all drowned out by the Great Flood. So I thought that was kind of a fun way to kind of tie into some stories that are, what some people consider folklore, some people consider religion.
Sure.
And that was one of the ways that they did it. Then what happens is the Celestials leave, and they say, get your act together.
Pretty much.
And they leave.
Yeah. Right? That's kind of cool. It's like, all right. And they have like a huge like spaceship. That's pretty cool. They always visit. And there's like 4 of them, or 4 or 5 Celestials in there.
And they're like 2,000 feet tall. I mean, they're monstrous robot-looking things.
Right.
That are
they pretty much
powerful.
reach space.
They're just they're just part of that, and they just come to Earth, and then whatever civilization is there at the time, they think, oh boy, we're in for a judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And then they introduce you to another Eternal, because Icarus starts sort of freeing the Eternals and saying, like, you know what,
dormant.
it's our time. Yeah, it's our time to come back. So the first one that comes back is
Ajax.
Ajax.
Yeah, he's cool. I love him.
So I think this is a good time to sort of mention the Eternals movie.
Yes.
So we all know there's a movie coming out, and Ajax in the comics is a male Eternal.
Yes, kind of a muscular dude.
Yeah, and he is what the Incans.
Yeah, he was their close, he was like the word of the gods,
their champion.
Yeah, their champion.
And in the movie, Salma Hayek plays Ajax.
I was like super impressed though.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
So they changed it. They changed the character from a man, and then the comics, they allow Ajax to kind of have her femininity a little bit,
right?
And say like she's the mother figure, she's the protector.
Yes,
she's like the Mother Earth.
And I think that's going to make her the character more interesting.
Yeah, because
he's okay on his own. He's fun to read, but I think that would just make it better for the audience today.
And I think it ties into like her love of the Earth.
Yeah.
Because what happened was the Eternals, they can really go wherever they want. I mean, they could go out to space if they want. They could do whatever they want because they're pretty much invulnerable. They can fly. They can shoot like lasers.
Yeah.
Out of their head.
Each one has like you'll find out as you look into more of what the characters can do. Each one has like one maybe unique power from the other, but really they can all they have all the superpowers. They have basically all the powers of Superman besides like the weird ones.
Yeah.
They don't have any like kryptonite allergies or anything
X-ray
like that.
or whatever.
X-ray vision. But they're very super powerful on their own. And they're kind of immortal, so.
So the Eternals, I think the movie's going to be true to their original design, is that they are protectors of the Earth. They are secretly protectors of the Earth, and they've been sort of guiding humanity through some of their biggest struggles. So, like the fall of Atlantis, the Great Flood, the fall of the Egyptian Empire. They've been there with all of that. So. It is cool to see that they're introducing them into the Marvel universe. And I think the first thing everyone will ask is, well, where the heck were you? We just went through this.
And that's the question they posed in the trailer. And it will be cool to see what Kevin Feige came up with an answer.
Yeah. I mean, if I were to come up with an answer, I think the easiest thing would to say is that we are Eternals. We've been here for 12,000 years.
Yep.
We've seen some pretty rough stuff. What you just went through is not the worst.
Yes.
So I mean,
think that's how they're going to play it.
Maybe for the Eternals, it wasn't really on their radar. Like in our eyes, it was a big deal.
All right.
But like maybe in their eyes,
small peanuts.
Yeah, I was like, well, sorry, we weren't here, but we were here, but we weren't here.
Yeah.
And we wanted to see if you can figure it out on your own.
Right.
Because that also seems like what Jack Kirby is trying to get at is there's three races on Earth in a sense. There's
Yeah.
deviants, humans, and Eternals, and the humans have to be built up to a point where they can actually handle the Earth
Yes.
on their own.
Right.
Because when the Celestials come and check in, they'll be like, "Hey, humans, how are you doing?" And if the humans are like, "We haven't figured anything out," then the Celestials will just destroy the Earth.
Sure. And I guess that's a good point. So jumping back to the comic, so this fourth host. So we already jumped ahead one, like the third host. We're going to the fourth host. Just that's what the present day is.
It's like the fourth visit.
Yeah, the fourth visit. When the Celestial lands, I believe his name. I have his name. Or their name.
Arishem, the judge?
Yes. Arishem, leader of the fourth host, the judge.
I'm so good.
Yes. Because there's like 4 of them that land, and you get introduced one each one as you keep reading through the Jack Kirby run. But he, like, the first reaction is like Ajax starts to decipher or communicate with him. Then the deviants just want to blow him up.
Yeah, so Ajax, the Eternal, who's played by Selma Hayek, is the one who
can communicate.
Yeah, talks to the Celestials.
Yes.
So they're the powerful one.
Right. And then the humans, as we were kind of leading it on, their instinct is, well, it's pretty big, but we don't know what it is, so we're going to shoot it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The deviants want to shoot it because they hate the Celestials for, blowing up all their city.
Because the first evolution of Earth was that the deviants were the dominant species, and the Celestials came down and said no, and they wiped them out.
Yep, that's not what we wanted. Boom.
But some of them survived, and they lived underground, so they actually do survive.
Yep. So I thought that was very interesting because there's some humans that are like, oh, let's learn, let's get educated, and then there's the other, like the army is like, nope. Boom. And I'm like, oh, yep, that still has to. And so the Turtles are trying to mediate this peace or get some sort of treaty. And so they do in their power to protect the Celestial at the same time because they're the stewards of the gods.
Right. So the Eternals have, I don't know, like their main role is to keep the Earth evolving, like keep humans safe so that they can continue. So when the Celestials come to judge the Earth, the Eternals are there to prove that the humans are on the right path.
Sure.
They're not there yet, maybe, but they're on the right path.
Sure. And I guess at the end of the first 2 issues, they kind of figure out this battlefield, kind of come to a truce, or at least push the deviants off a way where they're like, we'd rather fight another day, run back home, fight another day, and regroup. The Celestials, they stay for like 50 years during the Jack Kirby run. Even though we don't see all 50 years play out, they stay there and keep monitoring different parts of the Earth.
Yeah,
and the Dr. Damien that we were introduced, he has to stay there.
Yeah, he's like,
nobody can leave.
They make like a bubble around them.
You have about 10 minutes to leave.
It's a 50-year bubble that's around them.
And so Dr. Damien stays. He's like, I'm old and this is like my dream. I'm going to stay here. Daughter, Margot, you're going to go with Icarus and
go back to the world.
Yeah, go live with him.
So here's a couple of things that I thought was interesting. Number one, I thought it was interesting that Kirby said this is a huge world altering thing and everyone's going to see it. Like, I thought it was cool that this huge Celestial standing on a mountainside and another Celestial's like taking samples in the ocean and another Celestial's like walking across the desert.
Yeah.
And so people are seeing these huge robotic looking humanoid things. And Kirby's like, yeah, that's what's going to happen. They're going to see it.
Yep.
Where usually in comics,
there's like illusion cast,
or
they
get
put the cart behind it, or
and like even the superheroes and stuff, like you get the idea that people know that there is superhero, sort of like how we know that the military is doing stuff, but like not a lot of people actually see it in real life. So for this, it's like the whole world is aware that these robots are on the Earth and nobody knows what they're up to or what they're doing. So then to explain that, like the Eternals kind of come forward and say, we're the Eternals, and like we've been watching humanity for years. And I just thought that was like a bold move. And that's why I was thinking, if Kirby was to introduce this into the Marvel universe, I don't know who he would have to like run that by to like say, hey, how about we make this canon? How about we make this like an irrefutable part of the Marvel universe?
Yes.
Which at first I found too that it was written outside of continuity because they couldn't agree on that.
Yeah.
Which probably frustrated Kirby.
Yeah.
He's like, I want to write something. I wrote the whole Marvel universe, or I drew the Marvel universe, and I want to put something in it. And they're like, well, we'll figure it out.
Sure. And then as the story keeps progressing, you know, Icarus and Margot kind of go into humanity, and he introduces his fellow Eternals that kind of live in society. And so you get introduced to more of the cast. And the next Eternal we get to introduce is Cersei, the illusionist / party goer, the hostess.
The one who's having fun with the humans.
Oh, she is the most fun.
Yeah.
Yes. She
is
living her best
played
life.
by Gemma Chan.
Yes. And so fun fact, she also was in the Captain Marvel movie as well, playing was it like Minerva or something like that?
Oh yeah, Minerva.
And so that was a very minor role for her. So it was very, I guess maybe when they were kind of casting this movie, they were like, oh, she'd be perfect for this role. Let's give her a shot. And it'll be cool to actually see what more of her real acting skills and things like that.
Because no one remembered her as Minerva? Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think so. It's a very minor role in the grand scheme of that movie. So I think it was very cool.
She was one of the Kree.
Yeah, the Kree. Yeah,
Star Force people. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. And so, that's cool. They were there, but so yeah, I'm super excited to see Cersei live action. She'll be awesome.
Yeah, and I guess she's sort of like the lead of the Eternals in the movie. Like plays a big part of it. So
yeah.
They're getting some good people actually to really be in the Marvel universe now. Yeah. This is the new. I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. This is the new lineup of Marvel actors. Yes. So if you remember, sort of, you hear the terms Phase 1, Phase 2 in the Marvel universe. Yeah, I mean, like Robert Downey Jr. and
Chris Evans.
They're like done. So this is now the new
guard.
The new guard is coming in, and that's why I think it's exciting to read where this began. And also I think it's interesting for people to understand that it came from 1976. Like these are old stories they're tapping into.
Yeah. And so we're introduced to her. She's like, she hasn't been like dormant. She's been just hosting parties, and that's what a lot of these Eternals that have lived on Earth, they've kind of took on like a mythology of their own. Like you'll learn that Athena is actually Athena. That was in Greek mythology. That Athena. Oh yeah, we know her.
Yeah.
And like Cersei was the one that was actually turn people into gorgons and pigs and things like that.
Yeah, Cersei. Yeah, that's true. Cersei, if you look up like the Odyssey.
Yeah. Yep.
Cersei is spelled a little different, but she is the same Cersei that turned the soldiers into pigs.
Right. And things like that. So if it makes total sense why Kirby would, go back to that and say, what can I do with these characters of mythology and bring them back to my own Marvel creation story? I loved how he tied those in.
Yeah, because he wants to keep the actual familiarity.
Right.
Cersei said she turned them into pigs. She also said that she had a little fun with Merlin, and she was like showing her
Merlin
sorcerer.
Magic. Yeah.
So she was like a sorceress, and it was really just kind of funny to say that the stories that we consider folklore, that we consider mythology, are actually real stories that the Eternals showed their power more than they have in a long time. So, and that's exactly what mythology is that enough time has passed where people see it as, oh, that was magic.
Yes.
Where nowadays, I mean, some things, like microwaves and cell phones are magic.
Yes, exactly. And so we get introduced to more of the cast. there's another attack in the middle of town of against Deviants and the Eternals, because they're like, oh, Icarus, you screwed us over when we tried to attack the Celestials, so we're gonna bash on you a little bit, teach you a lesson. And we find out one of their weaknesses of minor things is like the brain mine. Like they have a gun that can shoot a brain mine, like a thing that sticks on your head. Looks like the Brainiac sign, actually. But that's my thing. But it basically just zaps them out and has like minor like mind control powers. But mostly just zaps them out. They're like unconscious, basically.
So you get an introduction to kind of like Kirby coming up with all sorts of wacko technology too.
The only thing that I didn't know, or at least from the trailer, the Eternals trailer, is if Crow is going to get introduced. He's the leader of the Deviants. We don't know if he's getting introduced in this movie or not. Maybe they'll show us later. I don't know. But he is a very interesting villain that is played out in Jack Kirby's story.
Yeah, I didn't see him on like the short list of.
I didn't either. So maybe they'll reveal later. I don't know. Maybe they're holding on to it. That'd be cool.
And then another side story through the whole thing is that the Eternals are constantly like working. I'm sorry, not the Eternals. The Celestials are constantly working on Earth, doing things, flying around and picking up stuff. And you're like, what's all the activity? And you find out that the Celestials are gathering atomic signatures. So they'll like pick up animals, and they'll pick up mountains and grass and stuff, and they'll turn it into like atomic I don't know, like storage containers, and then they're collecting all of that. So they're sort of preparing for the Earth to not pass the test. And if the Earth does not pass, then at least they have all these atomic samples and they can go somewhere else and like
duplicate it,
rebuild it.
Yeah,
that's the idea.
Yeah. And so some of the other characters that you get to see is like the character that has the hardest pronounced name, because when you look at it, I pronounced it like 3 different ways.
What you got?
Malachi.
Yeah, I guess that's
Malachi was the hardest one because I thought it was Markai, Mercury, Mercury, because he's based off the character Mercury, like the god.
He moves fast.
Yes.
So yeah.
And so the only reason why I know it's Malachi is because they said it in the trailer. And I was like, oh, it's Malachi.
You're like, what? But it's spelled Makari.
Mercury, yeah.
Well, they say it in the comics Makari, and then they say, yeah, it's Mercury because the humans spelled it wrong.
Yeah.
And so regardless, he was one of the Eternals who focused on
the technology.
Speed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
So
speed,
he's like the fast one.
And he can drive all the ships.
Yes. And in the movie, he is played by Lauren Ridloff, so another sort of gender swap, and he is the first deaf superhero in the MCU.
Yeah, so that's right. Yeah, she's the first deaf one.
Yeah. I don't know how they're. It's really
and they're
fun.
Also, just since we're talking about groundbreaking, like with for that, Echo, another Daredevil character, is also going to be introduced in Hawkeye.
Oh,
and
cool.
She was also like another very prominent like deaf character.
Yeah, that she can.
But she's a deaf character on purpose versus a deaf actor playing the role. So I think they're trying just to see just a new angle on the character.
Yeah, and just I kind of like the idea that they're taking the Eternal story and they're sort of tweaking it a tiny bit. You'd expect them to, but they're also, I think, tweaking it to, like you said,
expand it,
the modern day.
Yeah, the modern day, and expanding some of these concepts.
Yeah. And then saying like, all right, if we're going to make this character really work,
then
we're going to have to switch it up for the cinematic quality of it.
Yeah, which makes sense. And Marvel seems to be doing okay with that so far. Some choices are interesting than others, but
I think they figured it out a little bit. Yeah,
they're learning.
And I just want to kind of jump back to the Deviants, because you think, well, what have they been doing this whole time? So you have the Celestials who came down the Earth and were getting ready to judge the Earth in 50 years. So it's kind of, I think that's a good move from Kirby to say, these are Celestials. They deal on forever. Like they live in eternity. So what's 50 years to them?
Mm-hmm.
So they'll come and they'll make a decision in 50 years. And for humans, it's like, well, that's a long time. And then the Deviants, they're trying to take that time and say, now is our moment to either, number one, get rid of the Celestials, and they start looking for weaponry to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or number two, to sort of push our dominance over the humans once more, so that when the Celestials make their decision, the humans are not in charge of the Earth. We are in charge of the Earth. And
Exactly.
maybe they'll give us a chance to say, fine, you've taken over the Earth twice and you can keep it. So the deviants start sort of launching like a psychological war where they change the appearance, because they can kind of warp their appearance a little bit. So they change it to look like devils and demons. And
they play it up in that early. That's the only time they ever did it too.
Yeah, and they play it like, all right, humans, we're devils. Yeah, and like you need to fear us.
Because was it Crow? He pretends he's like the devil.
Yeah, like or whatever. Grew horns on his head. So, they're all over the place with some of this mythology, and they're all over the place with sort of like stories that humans are gullible to, and stories that they'll sort of bow down to or give up on.
Which is smart on Jack Kirby. I mean, he's leaning into every influence at every angle he can come up with.
He threw his whole imagination to the story. Very cool. Very cool.
And then you're introduced to just more of the cast, Thena and her father Zurus, who's the leader of the Eternals. Kind of what they specialize in, different weaponry that they bring to the table. Thena still has her weapon or strategy expert. She can come up with every strategy. And she's the daughter of Zurus, the leader. And they're just kind of they're like the reinforcements, the leaders, and they change the tide of the battle against the deviants. And you kind of you love watching. They're like the action heroes. You're like, oh, okay. Besides Icarus, who's like Superman.
Yeah.
Icarus's powers, he shoots laser beams and he's tough.
And Richard Madden plays Icarus, which is
that's pretty cool casting choice
from Game of Thrones.
You'll know him. Yes, is Robb Stark.
Yeah,
and
King of the North.
King of the North for 5 seconds.
King of the North, long enough, sort of long enough. But yeah, and then Angelina Jolie is Thena. So Thena is the warrior.
And Angelina Jolie is finally in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's hard to believe.
They really pulled in a good crew.
Yeah.
So, as the Eternals kind of marches on, each issue became sort of its own tiny progression of the story. And so you get the idea, of course, I mean, Kirby, this is like his 40th year making comics. Yeah. But you get the idea that he understands the march of comics and he understands the timing of comics and that
the pacing of it.
Each issue has to have something happen. You have to have a catalyst. You have to have, you turn the page, there has to be a surprise. So he's either introducing new characters in every issue or he's introducing a new
relevation.
Yeah, a new connection or a new a question that was in the previous issue. He's answering that.
Sure.
So
it's pretty cool.
You have to remember though, it's late 70s. So
they're still doing wacky stuff and things like that. Like another thing that we might see in the movie, they kind of alluded to a little bit, is the uniting of the Unimind.
Right.
It's like it's like a big mind meld. That's all you have to know. It's a big mind meld. They put all their powers together. They warp around and they look like a giant brain. And it's a giant yellow brain. Will it look like that in the movie? Probably not. I hope I don't. I hope they come up with some sort of like a Transformer or like a Power Rangers like robot or something like that. Just something that doesn't look like that if they're going to do it.
So you want it to be turned into like an actual like physical something?
Yes, not a brain, not a walking around.
I just think it'll be like in Black Panther when they went to like that spiritual realm. I think it'll be like that, where they sort of like what it is all the different
plane or something.
Yeah, like all the Eternals come together and they share their experiences and they share their ideas.
That's basically what it was too.
Yeah.
They didn't really like blast something or whatnot. They just
wasn't like the Power Rangers all came together.
Yeah, that's how basically it kind of survives this.
So Andrew wants is some mech android.
I do want it. It'd be cool to get a mech. I mean, that's what the Celestials are, just giant space god.
He wants a giant sword to chop the giant robots.
Yes.
We'll see. But the the important thing to I think take away from this is, number one, Kirby came up with this whole idea and said, how about we do this? And the Marvel Universe didn't totally embrace it. I mean, in the comics, I mean, the
Sort of.
Celestials, yeah, they're Eternals. The Eternals went on to make the Inhumans, which is Thanos is one of the Inhumans.
Yeah.
There's like lots of cosmic ties. So this is sort of one of the beginnings of all of these cosmic ties.
Sure.
And it is cool to see the movies not being afraid to introduce things like this,
Yes.
or introduce things
The
like
origin of the origin story.
yeah, and then go cosmic. Everyone knows sort of the next phase of the Marvel movies is to sort of go cosmic.
Yes.
Got that idea with Captain Marvel. And
and
figured it out
Guardians
with
of the
Galaxy.
Galaxy, and Captain Marvel is huge.
and like people
introducing
loved
Kree.
it, so they're like, cool, we're just going to continue with that. Part of it.
See how far we can push it.
Yeah.
Even though Inhumans failed, that sucks. But I think if Eternals works, the rumor is they might introduce the concept of what a mutant is.
Oh yeah, bring the mutants into it.
Into
that would kind of bring it back down to like the Earth level, ground level.
Yes.
Because I noticed they're not like pursuing Daredevil movies and Punisher and stuff like that.
Yeah,
they're kind of going a little more
tiptoeing, around the street level.
cosmic.
Yeah. So at least for their movies, they are at least.
Yeah, that's true.
You could argue that.
So we'll see. I think a resurgence of these ideas. It's cool that they're going back to the original fountain, which is Kirby.
Yep.
Kirby is the man. Kirby is the great artist. It's fun when you kind of read up about him. Is that he was given like a paragraph. He was given like, hey,
that's
how about we do this? This villain appears, this hero fights it, and they go to Europe and they fight at the Eiffel Tower and blah, blah, blah. And Kirby just drew the whole thing out, just like 20 pages of just straight up drawings. And they figured out the dialogue later on. You got the idea that, Kirby had dialogue of his own.
Right.
And you can't help that. If you're an artist and you're creating a piece, you have a story that you're putting into it.
Yeah. You have voices for these characters.
Yeah. It'd be like drawing a book and then having someone else write all the words. I think that'd be pretty hard to do for some creators. So
real quick, we've talked a lot about Jack Kirby, the artist, and we can talk about like Kirby dots and the technology, and we kind of brought that up. But what do you think of Jack Kirby, the writer?
Well, for this series, I think it worked because I think Jack Kirby as a writer works if he has it all like inside him that he just needs to tell. Like, it's sort of like he's holding in all this dialogue and then he could just like express it.
Yes.
But I think if you gave Kirby like, here's the Incredible Hulk, or, gave Kirby some other story, I don't know. I think he might have some difficulty in
even doing it over someone else's art. I don't think he would never do that.
No, like I don't think he could switch to be a writer instead of an artist.
Sure.
So for this one, you got the idea that this was just in his brain, that he just needed to just tell this story.
Yeah.
And the pacing is good. Actually, the writing was very
comparatively
good.
to Stan Lee stories where it was very narrative heavy.
Yeah.
I actually think the pacing works a lot better.
Yeah. I thought this was very
think he's
decent.
a little bit of better, like at least in this context, he was a lot better writer than Stan was.
But here's the thing. So the Marvel method, we've talked about that in the past. The Marvel method is in the morning, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby would sit down and Stan Lee would say, what should we do today?
In the studio.
What should we do today? And then Kirby was like, I don't know. How about we do a Spider-Man? And he's like, all right, how about Spider-Man fights, the Green Goblin and they kidnap Aunt May and Spider-Man doesn't want to tell you. So they just sort of come up with this rough idea, right? And then Kirby goes and does all the drawings and then Stan Lee tries to make sense of each panel and tries to fill in the words based on what Kirby drew. So if Kirby drew Spider-Man swinging over over a school bus, Stan Lee would feel like he needs to write dialogue for Spider-Man, for the crossing guard, for all the kids, and the bus driver. It was like, Stan Lee, you don't need to add all of that, right? Yeah. But for Kirby in the Eternals, he was drawing the panel and he was writing the panel, so
Sure. So you could
he
do it all at the
knew.
same time.
Yeah, and he knew exactly
Versus coming
who
back
was
to it or
talking and
forward
why.
from it. Yeah.
Yep. So
That makes
I
sense.
think it helped better because Kirby just sort of knew where he wanted these characters to go,
Yeah.
and he started in that direction.
Sure.
I don't know if the words came before the art or if the art came before the words in
Sure.
Kirby, but who knows?
And I think if he didn't have all the experiences he did on Fourth World that he did, I don't think it might have been as smooth.
Yeah.
Because that was a big saga, and he just got done with the saga, and he's like, okay, if I'm going to do it the Marvel way or the Marvelized version of this, what would it look like?
Yeah, it was funny. He went to DC and did a huge Cosmic Gods.
Yeah, which was supposed to be a
Saga.
Thor story.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was supposed to build, like, he wanted to tell like a grand big Thor story after what he got done, and Marvel wouldn't take it. So he's like, okay, I'm just going to take it to DC.
And we'll just do a big New Gods thing there.
Yeah.
Which introduced Darkseid and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went back to Marvel and did a big space Cosmic Gods story there too.
Mm-hmm. Right. He did it so out of left field that they're like, okay. They did introduce, during his run, he did bring the Hulk into it, but we found out, as you read, not spoiler, I guess, it was an android.
Yeah.
And so we were all
like
kind of like, oh.
Robot Hulk.
Yeah, Robo.
I wonder why he did that. I was going to mention that. I don't know why he did that. Like,
I think it was editorial.
Oh, they said you got to introduce someone.
You got to introduce someone. Jack didn't want to do it, but he said, fine, I'll compromise.
He's like, fine, but it's not the real Hulk.
Exactly.
It's just some robot Hulk that kids made.
Yep.
All right. I could see that. But yeah, I was wondering, like, why the heck did they? Because that was the only issue that they started talking about. Did you notice they talked about other Marvel characters too? They talked about Hulk and maybe Captain America. Like they mentioned
briefly,
other people.
Just briefly.
Yeah. And you're like, why are they introducing all these people now?
Yeah.
But that was an old school way to do it, is to bring in characters that were popular and hopefully popularize your own.
And then I guess after you read Jack Kirby's run, if you still want, you kind of left hanging with a cliffhanger. We talked about this in the pre-show.
Yeah, there's only 19 issues that Kirby made.
Yep, and you feel like there's a cliffhanger. What I surmised from that is, when I was reading this omnibus, was that Peter Gillis, who's the next writer, says, I'm going to pick up where Jack Kirby left off. I'm going to take the concepts he was kind of leaning on. I'm going to still make my own villain. But he sort of has ties to all the cast, the deviants, the bad guys of the Eternals, and just kind of expand that. He's not recreating anything. He's just building off of it. And I like that it's another 12-issue series. And then Walter Simonson kind of finishes that run, which is kind of cool because he's one of my favorites. And
the ultimate cosmic.
Yes. Guy. And then after that was another guy. Roy Thomas does a little bit. And kind of does another issues, and it was just cool how this omnibus kind of, Jack started all these concepts and everything, but people appreciate and even the editors are referencing issues of Kirby that he did and building off that, and it flows actually pretty well from start to finish.
Well, that's good that they didn't try to erase it.
Yeah, and in a couple of issues of What If, they introduced like origins of like before Jack Kirby's run, but it still makes sense to what his Bible his like story Bible would have did, or something like that. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, because after the 19 issues that Kirby wrote and released in 1976 and 77. It just sort of ends. Like you don't know if the Celestials decided.
They were I think they were still trying to figure out how to pick up where he left off, what to do with all these rich characters.
They're like, the Celestials are gonna be here for 50 years. Kirby, what are we gonna do?
Kirby, Unfortunately, Kirby wasn't around to give him too many suggestions. I think he gave him some suggestions, or
they'd be like now. They'd be like they'd be making a decision.
You go to
2 years from now.
Right. Let me look up. Mark Grimwald. Because Mark Grimwald did the What If issues, and those came out in 81. So they took about a 2-year gap to kind of figure out what's going on. Mark Grimwald writes What If, and then Invincible Iron Man was, I think, somebody else. But that's kind of cool. Just how and then there's pretty much solid storytelling from 81, 83, 84, 85, 86, all the way to 1986. And then they take before another changing the guard in the 90s. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
They just kind of kept flowing.
Well, Kirby died in 1994. So
94, yeah. So he might have just kind of helped shepherd that a little bit.
Mhm.
But that's about, that's good.
The man Kirby. Well, we thought this was poignant to kind of jump back in history.
Yes,
kind of
jump back in history. And, I'm sure many of you in the audience who are listening to the podcast this is like a fresh slate. Like you don't have like a lot of prior knowledge to this. I knew just from reading Eternals here and there, some of the concepts of Eternals, but not like I couldn't recite off a character like who is Icarus, who is Malachi, who is the actual Marvel Comics Dina, who are they? So I felt we had to do some justice for this upcoming movie and tell you that.
And I give props to Marvel because they are introducing an entire pantheon of entire list of.
They're kind of leaning on star power.
Yeah, they're like these are not humans. Like they are definitely not humans. So if you get a chance, pick up either the complete collection or you can read it digitally. You pick up the omnibus that's out, the Eternals Complete Saga omnibus that's out. You can grab all sorts of older issues and little collections, even the Jack Kirby runs and stuff. So there's a lot out there, and I'm sure that they're going to repackage something for the movie too.
Sure.
So
yeah. All right. And that wraps up another exciting episode of Bam Pow Comic Hour. This is Andrew Glauner
and Chris Ramos
signing off.
Goodbye.